Welcome to Purposely Peaceful. I'm your host, Jessica Rivera, a licensed marriage and family therapist and a quantum hypnosis practitioner. This podcast is where real life meets inner peace. You'll get honest conversations, practical tools, and soulful guidance to help you live with more clarity, calm, and purpose. Welcome back. Something that I hear all the time is, well, this is the careers that I went to school for. This is what I've been doing for several years. This is all I know. And so this is what I have to do in life. Even though this isn't true, it sure feels true when you're in that position. Sometimes people stay together in marriages or long relationships that are no longer working, and it's only because they feel like they're supposed to be married once, that they've already put so much time into this person. Why would they end it now? And I say all this because there's a lot of different ways that we end up doing things. And a lot of times, these choices that we make sometimes are the result of what we've learned to accept. And there's enough life lessons that have taught me that life's too short to do what somebody else wants. Some say that they've been told their whole life that I should do this or I should do that. So I did, and now here I am, and now I don't even know what I really want. And for many of us, we're just doing what we've always done. There's like a series of steps and we're following them. And maybe sometimes it's because our parents said so, because our culture says so, because society said so, because of societal expectations, or because of what someone else has said and it sounded like a really good idea at the time. We're always picking up data and cues from everyone. Whether we're conscious of it or not, our bodies sometimes pick up these subtle cues. This may not be everybody's problem, but this is really common. To reach a point somewhere in your career, relationship, or just a place that you're at, and it just isn't working anymore. And it's either become intolerable or boring. Career burnout is real. When you are reaching your fullest potential at the place that you work at, it is also real. Maybe you want to excel in your career. Maybe you want to take on a new role. What if that's not possible? Sometimes relationships with people that we care about fade out. Some we need to end, and others we keep for life. That's just how it is. Things are constantly changing. Our desires, our hopes, and our dreams can change too. As a result, we realize that what we've been doing, what we thought we were supposed to do, isn't really cutting it anymore. Maybe we reach a point where we realize we aren't that happy anymore. And I did reach this point once, maybe a couple times, when I left a toxic work environment in, I want to say it was 2018. I could be a little bit wrong. But I left being highly anxious, super in my head. My self-esteem had taken a hit. My nervous system was fried, like bad. What had happened was I worked under a very toxic director. She had the reputation of making us all cry at different times based on whatever it is that she got triggered on. And I laugh now because it's crazy and I'm no longer there and I feel like I've healed from it for the most part. What set it all into motion was that I was the only clinician on staff at a crisis clinic. So people don't really have appointments. They kind of just come in whenever. And in this case, the waiting room was full. I was the only person there, and stabilizing clients could take a couple of hours. It's not something that you could do in 30 minutes. So I needed help. I needed backup. So I asked my director if I could get some support from the other location because at that time they didn't have any clients in the waiting room. I think they had about 3 clinicians on staff, maybe 2. Me asking that question triggered it all. And that was enough for her to accuse me of saying that she wasn't supportive and that if she thought I needed help, she would have helped. And she went off on a rant. I don't know how long it was, but it felt like forever. Side note here, I was very hyper aware of how I was communicating with her. And I know for a fact that I was polite and I was respectful. I didn't demand it. I asked if I could get some support. And I respectfully asked her to pick up this conversation later because I had clients waiting and I didn't really have time. She demanded, and I feel like she yelled at me, but we'll just say she demanded that I do not end the call because she wasn't done. I was in shock. I was overwhelmed, but I was also trying to hold my ground because I knew that I wasn't accusing her of anything. At some point, I start crying. A first in my career. I had never cried because someone was being mean to me or just going off like this. It just was not something that had happened to me. And again, remember, I'm a therapist, and so you think you're going to work with really mindful people. Not always the case. So she knew I was crying, and I was still respectfully asked her to end the call since I had 3 clients waiting to be seen. The call finally ends, and I was so shaken up. I was crying to my colleagues who sat with me compassionately, helping me regain my composure. So, shout out to Melissa and Sylvia if they ever hear this. I am somewhat trauma bonded to you guys because of that experience. Long story short, this is something that she did to everybody else in different ways and even worse. But anyway, so I'm trying to regain my composure. I just wanted the day to end. I went home, tried to process what the heck happened. I slept on it. I was trying to figure out how this person could impact me like that. Some days later, I realized that my body was triggered. And so if you listen to the previous episode, it was a trauma response. I was just feeling something that I had already felt. And I realized that I was having the same feeling of being emotionally abused. My body was feeling it, and so all of this had happened, and I'm thinking, "Okay, well, I should probably stay at this job because we are new homeowners. I shouldn't risk any change right now that could impact our finances." I grew up being told that it wasn't good to change jobs all the time, and I had only been there 10 months. So what I was telling myself was, "Wait it out, stay here for at least a year, and then leave." Here's my dilemma, where I felt that I should do what I've been told. But I chose to question myself. Maybe I said it wrong. Maybe that's why she reacted that way. I was telling myself, well, she's made everyone else cry at the office. She's not just picking on me. I'm not the only one. I'll figure it out and maybe it'll blow over. And we just bought a house, so I can't quit. That was my ego telling me everything that it thought would keep me safe. I'd keep a paycheck and that'll keep a roof over our heads, but that's all it offered. Luckily enough, my body's response was so intense that I knew I had to leave because I know you can't change a person like that. My body recognized this pattern, this feeling, and it was completely unbearable. Like I could not tolerate anyone treating me like that. I had had enough toxic relationship experience to know that that wasn't okay. And I sure as heck wasn't going to put up with it. So this is one of those moments that I had to go against what others in society said I should do. And my husband was so supportive of whatever decision I wanted to make. And I remember by the end of that week, I was going to quit no matter what. I didn't care if I didn't have a job. That's how intense and unbearable it felt. Luckily, one of my colleagues had just moved to a different spot, and she said they were still hiring more therapists. And long story short, it worked out. I got an email requesting an interview. It went great. And 3 weeks later, I started at a new agency. My income doubled, and I only worked 25 hours per week instead of 40 hours per week. It was a game changer. That moment right there was confirmation that I did the right thing. I chose myself, and I went against what I was taught. Sometimes I think the universe tests us to see if we're going to rise up to the challenge. I don't like to think of it that way, but it sure feels like that sometimes. And this felt like one of those moments. I could have shrunk, played small, stayed put, because I've done that before. That was once a familiar feeling that I allowed in my life. Sometimes we're presented with many different choices. Sometimes those choices we make don't turn out to be what we expected. This could be a marriage, this could be a friendship, a career, a job, a belief. I share this story about this not very nice director because it taught me a few valuable lessons that nobody should be disrespectful. I'm not going to sit around and allow someone to be disrespectful. And so I either can set a boundary or I need to somehow change the circumstance. And in that case, I had to leave. But when I went to my new job, the problem is that my nervous system was completely shot. I was so stressed by the time I went to the new job. I always thought I was doing something wrong, even though I knew logically that I wasn't. I always thought I was going to get in trouble. I don't feel like I healed right away. This was actually a really long process. I remember in 2020, I was feeling so burnt out. I was not happy with my career choice. I was full of regret that I was a therapist. And sure, I loved the opportunity to work from home. That was amazing and life changing. But I was not happy with my career choice. In hindsight, it was hard to have a boss like that. I was extremely burnt out. I felt like I had to do my job because I had a mortgage, because that was a responsible thing to do. And it didn't matter if I was burnt out, because you know what happens when you're burnt out? They say get some rest and then get back to work. More and more people are realizing that they don't want to live dreadful and stressful lives. Most people, whether they know it or not, they are craving a sense of peace. But so many of us are deeply entrenched in our careers and our families. I share this because this journey really was about choosing myself, responsibly, of course, but choosing myself. A lot of time we don't realize like where we're even at, and our body will communicate it. It could be depression or anxiety. You'll have other symptoms that will show up to tell you like, hey, something's feeling off, something's got to change. And sometimes your body will tell you before your mind is even ready to admit it. And the real problem here is that we've been conditioned to stay, to push through, to be loyal, work really hard for the company you're working for, and give them your all. And then when you go see your family, you're already so tired and maybe you don't give them your best. And that's something that I have a little resistance to. I don't really like that. We confuse familiar with safety. And I think working somewhere where you're happy that creates safety, that's amazing. But just because it's familiar doesn't mean it's safe. This is me just challenging the narrative. Just because something is normal doesn't mean it's healthy, and it doesn't mean that it's good, and it doesn't mean that that is what's best for you. If you're content with life and everything is good, great. Sometimes a challenge for a lot of people is the identity crisis. And I feel like I've had this for a long time. I felt like I was a therapist and that's all I could be. I didn't know how to be anything else. They have all these rules about what I can and cannot do. And that was really suffocating to me. I started to learn about other things, and that's why I've taken Reiki classes. That's why I've taken herbology courses. I've studied under a shaman briefly. She taught a few different things. And I don't know what any of that all means. I felt called to do something different. And the one that has stuck, the one that I keep going back to that I think is really fun and the sessions are incredible is hypnosis. These transformations and the things that some of my clients have experienced, it's amazing. I would love to interview some of them and have them tell you their story of what they experienced. All this to say that I believe in hopes and dreams and magical things happening and manifesting your dreams. I believe in that stuff because I believe so profoundly that we can achieve whatever it is that we want to do. It's become easier for me to move around and do different things and make sometimes what some would consider them risky decisions or even costly ones. I've done things that were expensive and it didn't turn out how I hoped. If there's anything you're going to walk away with is that you deserve to be happy, to do something that you love, to create, to live your life in the way that you want to. And it's not always going to be perfect, but it's your life. If you recognize there's certain areas that are not in alignment, that do not represent who you know you are, does not represent the life you want to have, then use that as an opportunity to reassess and see, where do I need to change something? Where do I need to create the change so that it can get me closer to where I want to be? I know sometimes fear keeps us stuck and it's scary to start over, and nobody desires financial instability. And there could be some judgment. Staying stuck has a cost too. It's your peace, your energy, and the respect towards yourself and the things that you want to achieve in this life. I really do believe anything is possible. It's just a question of how much do you believe it and how hard are you willing to keep trying. I think change is scary, but it's also amazing and it creates a different opportunity. I always like to imagine that every time I make a decision, there's a fork in the road, right? So I'm going along my life making choices and I reach a fork in the road and I'm like, okay, I could do what I've always done. I could always be a therapist and just keep doing that. That's possible. But then I look at the opportunities and it could be really exciting. And it can be really interesting. The beautiful thing about hypnosis sessions, it's subconscious work. That is where all the change that we need in our lives is rooted. And so I'm like, you know what? I want to try that other path. This is something I like to remind my clients of. You've reached a fork in the road. There's a path that you've always gone, and then there's a path that you haven't tried yet, but you want to. Which one are you going to choose? And that's the beautiful thing. It's okay to stay with something that you're familiar with. It's okay to stay with your career that you've chosen. You might be really happy and content there, and that's amazing. But if you have something else tugging at you, a curiosity of something new, of something different, I don't know, it might be worth exploring. Either way, the choice is yours. Life's too short to live life disconnected from yourself. And peace doesn't come from doing what you should do. It comes from being honest about what's no longer working and what it is that you truly do want. And I want to thank you so much for listening. I'll catch you on the next one.